every week we run expert talks like this, and this week we're really lucky to have Stephanie Leue in Zurich with us. So Stephanie has a huge amount of product management experience. I think over 17 years. She's worked at places like PayPal, Contentful, Doodle. She's currently at Ringier, which is a big media company in the German, Swiss markets, I guess, but maybe you can give us a bit more context on that. And you're also a product coach, and you help people at the product leadership level as well. I know you've got your Substack and as well. So great to have you here, Stephanie. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Ed. Really look forward to have that conversation with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, maybe just some quick sort of notes for people watching. The way we're going to run this is as I fireside chat for the first 20 or 30 minutes. And then we will open it up to all of you to ask questions. And yeah, I will also when other people are asking questions, I will dig out some links so you can connect with Stephanie, and you have her LinkedIn and her Substack if you want to kind of follow her anymore. But Stephanie, look, I'd love to kick off almost with the title of this talk. We decided we talk about the silence of leadership, or the loneliness of leadership. You sort of said to me, like, actually that's kind of like one of the hardest things going into a product leadership role is not the pressure or the change in roles, but actually it's almost like this sense that it feels like you're all on your own. Can you unpack that a little bit for us and tell us, like, exactly what does that mean for you, or what do you see kind of people suffering from?
Yeah, absolutely. A fun fact first, since I started coaching, especially in the past couple of weeks, I do have a bunch of leaders who suddenly open up about that topic as well, because I'm not their peer any longer, but I'm their coach now. So especially in the last couple of weeks, I figured out, like, I'm not as lonely as I always felt I am, which is quite confirming. But look, if you're in that position, right, and I'm leading teams for, I think, almost 15 years now. I've been director, I've been CPO in various companies, and that position is challenging. Obviously, otherwise you wouldn't climb the ladder. But it's challenging, especially for four different reasons, at least from my perspective. You do have to manage a bunch of different relationships. You do have to manage up to your CEO. Usually you're paying a trust tax here, because if you're not doing a great job, your CEO starts micromanaging. He asks for more status updates. So you're somewhat in status update loops. If you're not performing as expected, if you're not delivering results, trust is decreasing, and suddenly your CEO becomes micromanaging even more. And that is definitely a super challenging situation, because if your CEO is not trusting you, you also can't protect your teams from a micromanaging CEO, which is tough. Now, if you do have that situation, usually also your C-level peers start having challenges with you. So they start discussing strategic friction with you. They start discussing your roadmap, your decisions. You have to align on tech debt with your CTO. You do have different opinions. You might not meet certain timeline. So there's constantly an alignment tax with your C-level peers. And because everything feels so messy, you also sit in one-on-ones with your PMs, and you pay a therapy tax because your PMs suffer from the situation you are in. They fear the CEO's micromanagement. They fear the misalignment between the C-level peers. And suddenly all of your one-on-ones turn into therapy sessions, because they are trying to escape that messiness and they can't. And their only way to do so is to kind of ask you for a solution, which you usually can't deliver. And once all of that is happening, the next thing that usually appears is that your confidence is decreasing as well. You see that many leaders talk about imposter burden. I'm not sure if imposter syndrome is a real thing for all leaders. But what I do see is that many leaders in that situation usually struggle a lot with stress and with confidence. And all of that can't be addressed with anyone. Like, you can't tell your CEO that you're struggling. You can't tell your C-level peers that you're struggling, because you always need to be strong. You also can't tell your PMs that you're struggling, because they expect you to deliver solutions. And then there are all these communities, but literally, I haven't been in a single communities where CPOs started telling each other that they struggle, because we all need to be strong in front of everyone. And I think that's what I mean by the loneliness, because this is what usually happens to us, right?
Absolutely. It's lonely at the top, as they say.
Mm.
I mean, I'm sure, if you're working through this with coaching clients, that is might be kind of quite a long process to kind of work through that. But do you have any sort of like immediate um, tips or tactics that people could get going with straight away that just take the edge off?
Yeah. One of the tips I always heard is like search for communities, join these product leader communities. Honestly, that didn't really help me personally, either because it was not C-level communities, but also aspiring leaders were in that community. So you haven't really had a very close group of leaders where you were able to address these things. So I think the only thing that really happens or that really helps is to start working on your confidence, right? Like work on your positioning, work on your self-awareness, work on how you perceive things, try to rewire your brain so that you're not constantly feeling challenged, but you start to also optimize for more positive energy,
Hmm.
I'd say. So most of the work happens within yourself.
And do you have any favorite exercises you recommend to people you're coaching?
Yeah, it really depends on the person. I can say that my personal preference is to focus on the things that provide me energy and not withdraw my energy, because all of the taxes you're paying obviously drain your energy and you're very fast running on empty batteries. What gives me energy personally is interacting with people and trying to unblock people. So, usually in these times where everything is super stressful and super busy, and where I start questioning myself, I go back to my roots and I just try to really interact with people. I go back to coaching, I spend more time with my PMs. I try to just really connect with people. And this connecting with people thing is something that gives me enough energy to not suffer from the stressful situations around me.
Yeah, great. You mentioned the trust tax that you sometimes end up paying with a CEO. Um, what do you mean by that?
Mm. It's huge, and we've all been there, right? Like when I was a product manager myself, I was always finger pointing to my product leader, saying like, "Why can't this person protect us from all the messiness? Like everyone is asking for features, everyone is throwing things over the fence. They want us to build things that weren't even really identified as crucial." And this constant challenge that you experience as a PM is 10x more intense when you're growing up into a leadership position, because suddenly it's the CEO and the board that are requesting things from you. And if you're not positioned very well in that relationship to your CEO, what usually happens is that they start micromanaging because they don't see you delivering results, they can't measure your impact, they don't really trust the decisions you make. And most of the leaders that I work with tend to talk about how they do discovery and how they do vision and how they optimize the roadmap and how they work with their PMs on research, etc. But that's not what CEOs want to hear, right? Like CEOs want to hear which impact you created. If you don't deliver that and if you don't speak their language, you lose their trust. And because you lose their trust, they start micromanaging you. And then you have to protect your team twice as hard as in another situation.
Yeah, I've certainly felt that myself, where I've realized I'm like behind the curve in terms of the expectations of the CEO, and then catching up with that and getting ahead of it is very, very difficult.
Exactly.
I mean, again, do you have any practical tips there? Like what in your experience is the difference between how product leaders sort of initially speak or kind of default to speaking and what CEOs are actually looking for, and how do you close that gap?
Yeah. Well, I can share an example from my time at Doodle. During my time at Doodle, I was also paying heavily the alignment tax because we have had a chief revenue officer, and the chief revenue officer had growth teams that were running experiments like crazy. like 10, 15 experiments a week. So they were able to just demonstrate numbers in every single exec meeting, and we had many of them. And so that was actually the language the CEO spoke, right? Like he wanted to see numbers, he wanted to see impact, and he didn't want me to talk about like when do we release which feature. And what I figured out is that I can't compete with that chief revenue officer because my teams can't experiment as fast as his teams do, which is fine. So I was wondering, like, what is my uniqueness that I can bring to the table? And the thing that I excelled most at was giving clarity on whom are we solving problems for, and how can we make sure we monetize the right target group. So I was doing a job to be done research with my design team. I was getting all the numbers from the data team to prove that the target group we identified is the target group that also drives most of the revenue. And then we structured all of the insights into something that the CEO also understood. And we turned it into a product vision and a vision prototype, like a very short visual of like how we think the product might look like in order to serve the target group that delivers most of the revenue. And so that helped me to combine my experience around visually demonstrating where the products might be in a couple of years with numbers and revenue. And suddenly I haven't had to compete any longer with the chief revenue officer because I was not in the urge to present any experiment numbers. But we were literally going back to like, how can we offer sustainable growth as a product team? And so I found my very own area where the chief executive officer was also super proud to invite us to the board and to let us present the longer term vision. And that changed our environment and it changed our relationship. But it also changed my relationship to the chief revenue officer because we were not competing against any longer, which again made the life of my CEO a little bit easier because he hadn't had to uh, yeah, carry the weight of our conflict.
Yeah, that's such a great story. It's a dynamic I've noticed myself as well, where if you don't own um, insights or kind of a unique perspective in the product team, then you end up having to kind of take someone else's strategy, someone else's insights, and it very much kind of puts you in some kind of subordinate relation to them.
Yeah.
Um, is that something where you, I don't know, coach people particularly on building a team in that particular area? Or how do you like if you don't have those insights like within your team already? Like how do you get on the right side of that, or how do you start to carve out that space?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest mistake I do see product leaders doing for years already, but now the problem is 10x more important, is they usually do not speak commercial at all, either because they never got trained to speak commercial, or it's not their key strengths, or they avoid it at all costs because they feel insecure. But that is a huge mistake, right? It's a mistake already as a product manager to be unable to talk about commercial and go to market and how we make money. And most people think that if they do discovery and they discover the problems to solve, that money will flow itself. It never does. So that's a completely wrong assumption. So one of the things I do with product leaders is to really question how much commercial aspects they do bring into their conversations with their CEO. More often than not, the answer is like they don't, because they don't have the data, or their team is not thinking commercially, or they do not have the right skills in their team. Like product marketing, for example, is one of the key skills in order to also speak commercial. So the org setup is wrong. The data layer is not really something they can trust, and the skills are not there. And I think they just need to fix all of that in order to really get the data from their teams, start working with a more commercial perspective on their products, so they can also change how they speak to their CEO.
Hmm. I mean, when you describe it like that, it makes me feel that this is actually quite similar to the problem that a lot of individual contributor PMs will have, where they need to be kind of really grounded in, you know, both quantitative customer data, but also, just speaking to customers on a regular basis to have the kind of credibility with peers that they know what they're doing. Do you think is that a fair parallel, or are there kind of specific challenges at the leadership level that may mean this kind of trust tax is different?
Mm. Well, I think it's just on steroids because suddenly you just don't need to deliver like revenue numbers, but you also need to speak all the financial numbers. Like I have had no idea what EBITDA even means when I started into my first director role. Honestly, I've never read a balance sheet outside my university degree, and there I didn't really care. But then suddenly you're sitting in these executive meetings and you have to go through all the numbers. And I think that was definitely a learning curve for me. And I'd wish that someone would have taught me that earlier in my PM career, that all of the business numbers are really extremely important for me to understand. And that's something that I think product leaders can definitely do. And I do in my role. I share balance sheets. I talk about EBITDA with my teams. I try to explain them how the things they do also tie back to the bigger number and to the things that we're looking at in executive meetings. And I think it's undervalued in most relationships. And product leaders should definitely spend some time to upskill their PMs early enough in their career.
Yeah. Is there, do you have any kind of favorite resources or if people aren't getting that from their line managers, where else can they look for that sort of thing?
I mean, if you're a public company, it's all available, right?
Mm.
Download it, throw it into Claude or your preferred AI, and ask it to give you a quick run through what these numbers mean, and then challenge it. Like put in your OKRs if you have some, add your product data if you have some, ask for relationships, and just start learning all of that. I think it's the easiest way. If you're not a public company, try to find a company that is somewhat comparable and where the numbers are public, and then use their balance sheet in order to rip it apart. But it's definitely something I would invest time into, because that definitely cost me a lot of confidence when I started into my first CPO role, and I was totally unable to understand all the numbers and wordings they were using. So I think, yeah, just do it.
Yeah, great. You've mentioned sort of relationships not only with the CEO but with other C-suite kind of executives. Um, do you have like what are the common challenges you see product leaders facing there, and what are the kind of top tips of advice you would give them?
It really depends, but I'd say especially in these days, the relationship between CTO and CPO is super crucial. We've always had fights with CTOs, right? As CPOs, I think that's part of the game. Potentially they are healthy. I've been in super healthy CPO CTO relationships as well. That's good, because the challenge we have is that we do need to balance all of the tech debt and the tech excellence and the upskilling with all of the feature requests from all around us and the things we want to work on in order to be innovative. If you do have an unhealthy relationship, and I've been there too, that is definitely extremely challenging, especially today, where the pressure from the board and your CEO is extremely high to not just deliver things much faster in a higher pace, but also throw all of the innovation pieces into your roadmap. Like suddenly you are supposed to build AI features, but on your roadmap, you already only have 30% capacity because 70% capacity goes into refactoring, for example. I've just been there, right? And then you do have friction with your CTO because he wants to do all of the refactoring stuff. You're not aligned. You do get pressure from your board and your CEO to deliver AI stuff and become more efficient and faster. And you can't, because you just can't align on a strategy with your CTO. And usually the CTO is not the one sitting in the boardrooms, it's you as a CPO. And then suddenly you struggle twice as hard as you've ever been before. So I think investing into that relationship and really trying to find a common language with your CTO is crucial, not just in terms of managing up, but also in terms of managing down. Because if you're not aligned with your CTO, your teams will suffer. And you will see that your PMs will have hard fights with engineering. They will fight about like the weirdest things like role descriptions and accountability and processes, while in reality, all they do is they try to cater for for the friction between CTO and CPO. So I think from all the relationships to your C-level peers, the relationship to your CTO is definitely the most crucial one.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I want to touch on AI briefly before we open up the Q&A, because I know this is something that you're thinking a lot about. It's something you're kind of like playing around with a lot at the moment. And I know when we talked about doing this chat, were talking about how AI is going to sort of increase the distance or between the best performing and the worst performing product teams. Where do you think those differences are going to open up? Like, what's that going to look like? The difference then between the best teams and the worst teams?
Yeah. I mean, first, I think in general, there are no best teams, right? Like each team in each industry and each company is different. They might be very amazing in some parts of their work and not so amazing in others. So I think like this best team or team thing doesn't really exist. And we have to distinguish two things. Number one is delivering AI in terms of features to your customers, right? That's a whole different story. But using AI in order to change the way you're working as product teams, that is the one thing that I would start focusing on in that discussion now. I do see three different company models evolving right now. Number one is the very legacy company, those companies who still have product owners, who still discuss project management, who get a lot of pressure from their boards and C-level to save money and to become more efficient. And they just struggle a lot because they are working in, like, I'd say very ancient ways. Actually, they do deliver product like following Scrum routines, for example, or even safe, and they do have super hard times to build products using AI. They might write some PRDs using ChatGPT, and that's it, right? Like maybe they do use some Jira AI features, but that's it. That's legacy. Like modern
Yeah.
teams, in a few words, in my real world, don't work like this any longer. The best teams, actually, or the most modern teams that I do see right now, do not think in roles any longer. So they are not set up in a way where they do have a product manager, a designer, and 7 engineers, but they literally work with builder teams. And in these builder teams, it might happen that the designer ships code, like all the things you hear in LinkedIn, right? Like it's the reality I do see in my coachings. I do see clients who just reorganize their entire product organization in order to have just pure builder teams. Super cool, super fast. I don't know where they are going. I don't know whether they are going to fail because they are creating massive feature creep. We will have to figure that out, right? But I think it's a very interesting way to look into how AI is going to reshape product management. And then there's a hybrid in the middle where some companies, and maybe that's the healthiest way, start experimenting with these builder teams. They still retain their like standard structure, but at least they start experimenting a little bit. That's interesting because there they can experiment with how can I really automate the entire process and transform towards a more spec-driven development, including AI written codes, AI QA, and all the stuff you hear. I think that's super interesting, actually.
Hmm. Hmm. I think it's really interesting talking about sort of the roles becoming less distinct and people looking for builders. Um, I'm interested in looking at this from both sides, actually. Like, if you're a product leader building a team of builders, what do you look for? And I guess that, you can flip it the other way and say, like, if you're a product manager who wants to be employable in 2 years' time or 5 years' time, what are the skills that you should build?
Yeah. Um, if I set up these teams, I only look for curiosity and boldness because that's all you need right now, right? Like building products in a new way means to let go of all the old boxes we were thinking in. It means we have to question whether we really need to write tickets, whether we really need sprints, whether we really need to do a 2-week discovery before we start building anything. It requires us to rethink if we are willing to let AI write the entire code. And it's a completely different mindset. And even if these people haven't had the experience to work that way, only if they are interested and curious and they are willing to take that step towards trying new ways of working, to me, that's enough of a signal in order to put them into a specific team because they will figure out the rest themselves, actually, right? In terms of upskilling, which has been your second question, I think for most product managers today, it's super overwhelming to upskill because you're already busy. You do have back-to-back meetings. You do get the pressure anyways. After work, you're super tired. So how do you even want to put in more AI pressure into your day-to-day work? I still would recommend everyone to do so, even if it's the tiniest little thing you can think about, even if it is like a private project. Example from me, I automated our entire family finances using Claude and Notion. I automated my entire side business using Miro, Claude, Notion, and Granola. Super nice as well. So just pick one thing and try it out. And you will definitely learn skills that you might not be able to learn in your day-to-day job, but that you will need in a couple of weeks or months in your current job or in your future job.
Love it. I think that's such an interesting point about curiosity as well. That's kind of like the one of the key things you need to look for. Like, how do you assess that in interviews?
Mm. It's the kind of question that people ask. It's really like if you're interviewing PMs, there's always this question of like, do you want to ask me anything? And then people who are asking like, are you following Scrum? Or like, how big is your engineering team? I can definitely say that's not the kind of product manager I would hire right away. But if I do have product managers who are asking, which tool stack are you using? Uh, um, what is your data setup right now? Which AI capabilities can I learn with you? If they rip apart our business model, so if they really deeply understood how we're working, and if they come up with ideas on how to make our product better using AI because they challenge me, I totally love that. But this kind of product manager is super rare, actually, at least in
Yeah,
Germany and Switzerland.
I think it's fairly rare everywhere. It's just some are more on social media, but there we go. Um, Look, I've got loads more questions I could ask you, but I want to make sure that I'm not hugging the conversation as well. So, yeah, if anyone else has a question, please do either stick up your hand and we'll kind of invite you to just come off mute and speak, or you can just stick your question in the chat and I can read it out. I'll give people a moment or two to collect their thoughts. Otherwise, I'll jump in with another question. Well, let me go for it then, and you can keep thinking if you've got any other questions. Um, One of the other topics we said we'd talk about, Stephanie, was the sort of the jump from being an individual contributor, being a PM, to being a product leader. And yeah, that is like a huge jump in terms of yeah, one of those major career transitions. What are the main sort of errors or mistakes you see people making, and what kinds of advice do you kind of give to them to prepare for that jump?
Mm. Most people continue acting as if they were a PM. So they still think in backlogs and in features and in making teams faster and collaborating with engineering. But I think the biggest difference between being a product manager and being a product leader is that you suddenly need to become an expert in systems thinking, because suddenly you're responsible for the entire company. You suddenly need to understand the sales strategy, because you can't just finger point to your sales team any longer saying like, "Ooh, why are you just throwing features over the fence?" Like, that's not appropriate in a C-level role. You can't finger point to your marketing team, because what happens is that they all pinpoint back to you and they do all of that in front of your CEO. And then suddenly you just to have like conflicts at a very high level, which dribbles down to your entire organization. So one of my biggest learnings was to always assume good intentions in my C-level peers, and to rather be super curious and trying to understand, how do you set up your teams? What is your strategy? Where do you see product strengths and weaknesses? So I was really interested to understand the entire organization as a living system. And I always try to understand how can product fit into that living system instead of trying to force everyone to understand that now we need to be product led and now we need to do what product wants and now we need to do discovery. And I do see so many product leaders who were thinking that once I am promoted into a product leadership role, I can make all my Marty Kagan dreams come true. Reality is you can't, never, um, unless you do have a very long breath and at some point in time you get promoted to CEO, maybe things look a little bit different. But like changing this mindset from telling everyone how wrong they are towards becoming the person that is really curious, thinks in systems, and stops finger pointing, I think for me, that was a big personal shift.
Yeah, absolutely. The chat has exploded with questions, so I will run through these just in the order they came through. First from Prapti, who is asking, how do you develop commercial acumen in industries that you're new to?
Mhm. I can give you an example from my time at Doodle. What I've done at Doodle was I was sitting down and I tried to understand the flywheel effect. Like Doodle is a SaaS company. In I'd say almost every company has kind of a business model you can draw either in a wheel or in a loop or in a whatever. Try to understand how that company makes money and try to somewhat draw that on a Miro board. And then go to your CFO or someone underneath your CFO and try to understand, like, how do we make money? Like, look, here's what I do see. What do you see? What is our churn? What is our activation rate? Which numbers are we measuring? What are the data points that the C-level is looking into? And just really try to understand how your company makes money. To me, that was super helpful, even drawing this like growth loop at Doodle, where we made money with subscription and advertising on a Miro board, and then sit together with the CFO, telling him how I see the business was a big reveal for the two of us, because he never thought in growth loops, and I never thought in balance sheets. And what we learned is that we're talking in this more product centric way. We suddenly find levers and data points where product can support the CFO, but also the CFO can support product. So yeah, start drawing the business model and try to understand how they make money in your own terms and then validate it.
Yeah, yeah, super. Thomas has got a question around what is your experience with the AI hype around sort of just shipping faster and the effects on teams? You know, uh, you know, should you sort of stay curious and take your time to kind of investigate the opportunities that are out there, or is it fine to kind of like lean into that momentum, into that pressure, and kind of just ship a bit faster and take a few more risks? I think I'm
Yeah.
summarizing that. There's a few different comments there.
Yeah, totally. It depends, is my standard answer here. I'm currently working in an environment where, yes, there is AI pressure, but at the same time, there is a lot of resistance towards shouldering that pressure, which is interesting because, like, my organization is hard to convince to work with AI in their day-to-day routines. And so far, no one really screams out loud that we have to shift towards becoming fully AI fluent in that organization. So people seem to stay in their comfort zone. I would love them to use more AI. I would love them to become faster, but the resistance within these people is like quite high. And I think that's a leadership challenge because that means that you haven't had a very successful transformation into new ways of working, which is the case in many more ancient, more legacy companies. So I'd say in these companies, pressure might be high, but resistance is higher. So you can lean back if you want to, if that's the right environment for you. For me, it's not. I do see companies where there is a lot of pressure, but there's also a lot of curiosity in the teams. And once these teams stepped into the AI hype, I just see them doing amazing things. And usually these teams never want to go back into their old ways of working. So I personally am a full supporter of this AI hype thing because I do see how teams become happier, deliver faster, deliver more, and become more open to experimentation and collecting data and validating their insights. So I think it's a good thing, actually. And the third thing, I'm currently building a product as a side business with my husband as well. So we're totally in that AI hype. And I can tell you, like, as a startup, this is the only way forward. Like, we're definitely never going back to writing tickets or having a backlog or not working with AI written code and a set of agents because, like, this is so much fun and the results are so incredible. I can't even imagine to ever go back to a legacy way of doing product in my entire life. I'm potentially unemployable meanwhile.
There's a couple more questions on AI, which I'll bundle in here. Robert's asking, or he's saying, like there's one way of kind of working with AI, which is automating a few steps here and there, and kind of thinking about piecemeal how you can automate your workflows. Um, but he sees a lot of the discussion seems to be sort of saying, hey, actually, this is just such a new way of working that you need a completely new, way of thinking about things, a new way of operating. And that feels like a real step change that, he's not really sure how to kind of like get there. So what's a kind of sensible approach to thinking about this?
Yeah, it's like with all things within product, the same thing. If we're trying to think too big, we will never really move the needle at all, right? And I do see this in all the organizations that are trying to transform towards using AI in their day to day. They struggle heavily. And they struggle on the one hand because it feels like so incredibly hard to achieve an entire AI driven organization because this goal is just like big and hairy. But they also are unable to break it down into really small, concrete steps. And if they do, these steps feel so small that they think they do not move the needle at all. So, what I do recommend my teams, meanwhile, is to just take one single thing in their day to day and start like really giving the AI enough context in order to automate that work. And then, if you start experimenting with this kind of workflow, and if you understand that you do need a well defined workflow that you can translate with AI into automated workflows, you will get more creative and more creative over time. And I think this definitely has compound effects because if you start somewhere small and you continue, you will at some point in time have a state where you are more or less happy. I do see that with my design director right now. He started super small, some AI studio stuff here, some Figma prototyping there. And meanwhile, the team is so AI fluent that the designers start coming up with ideas themselves. So they start reaching out to front end engineers, they start suggesting that they can change their ways of working. And suddenly, all of this became a motion just because the leader walked the talk. And they are now, meanwhile, really questioning everything they're doing. And they are so open to reinvent themselves. It took them 8, 9 months, but it's definitely one of my leading teams right now and quite impressive. So start small, think big, fine, but start small and be patient. This is nothing you do in a week or two. It takes a year at least, depending on the size of your org.
Yeah, great. So reassurance there, you don't need to go from 0 to 100 all in one go.
Mm-mm.
Um, Tammy's asking, how do you ensure product strategy stays truly customer led at scale rather than becoming stakeholder led?
Mm. Honest answer? Tell me you can't. You can't. I and there's a reason for that. I've seen a single company in my entire career that was able to execute their strategy and that was contentful. I have seen many, many strategy shifts at PayPal. Whenever there was a new competitor, like Stripe, for example, everyone was running around like headless chicken. We changed strategy, right? Like that was the one example. I worked in companies where we had beautiful strategy slides and everyone was able to even really point to the strategy slides, but reality had nothing to do with these strategy slides. And I think that's reality for most companies. But at Contentful, that was slightly different. And I absolutely loved it. And I recently figured out like why it worked so well there. Because we were all centered around a single problem we were solving for our users. We were all super clear who is our ICP, which problem is this ICP facing, and everything else happened almost automatically. Like every product decision really was falling under the guidance that we got from our CEO. It worked super well until a competitor figured out that there is another ICP in the same space that you can make money with. And this was a shift that Contentful was never able to do as well. So they were still targeting the same ICP for years, while their competitors kind of bypassed them because they were more flexible. That was the only moment in time where I felt like it would have been good to have a strategy shift here. But overall, I'd say if you haven't been able to follow your strategy in the past, AI won't make it easier at all.
Um, okay, so next question is from Frank, who's asking, I said, you talked about becoming an expert in systems thinking as you move into product leadership. What helps you build that skill and practice beyond learning on the job?
Yeah. I'm a mom of four, so I need to think in systems anyways, right? Because I'm part of a very living system. But I think I had two things. I did a coaching certification, and during this coaching certification, I not only coached myself for 14 months, a bunch of different people, but I also got coached almost every week, which was intense but helpful. That was number one. Number two, I've done a master degree when I was almost 40. And during that master degree, we learned to understand the strategies of the other departments in our organization. And we learned how important it is to connect the dots between all the things that are ongoing in a company. And combining these two, I think the thing that shifted for me the most was my curiosity. So I definitely became more curious than ever before. And I stopped thinking that people have bad intentions. And I started to always assume good intentions in my private, but also in my professional life. And I think that definitely was a big breakthrough for me personally, and also helped me to climb the career ladder potentially faster than with my old mindset.
Fantastic. So Nitin had a series of questions around offshoring, or sort of like where you put different parts of your company. And maybe I can summarize this and sort of say, um, if you're at a European-based company, how do you think about which parts of your organization you keep based in Europe, and which parts of your organization might benefit from being offshored?
I think that is a question I can't really answer very well.
Okay.
We do some near and offshoring. I'm also coaching companies who do near and offshoring. But I think having one single answer to the question is, at least to me, impossible. I'm sorry for that, Nitin.
No problem at all. Okay, final question then from Tumas. And then I think we'll be pretty much at time anyway and should wrap up. So they are asking, um, if you are AI positive yourself and very excited about all the things that AI can do, but you're dealing with skeptics at the C level, more senior to you, how can you bring those people on board?
Hmm. I wonder if that's a bad thing because I haven't seen that at all in any of the companies or within my network. It's rather the other way around. CEOs are so overly hyped on AI that they even start vibe coding and bug fixing themselves over the weekend, or prototyping, which is definitely challenging. I haven't seen it the other way around. So I wonder if that is truly a big challenge because product is a black box to everyone anyways. Like no one has an idea what's going on in product. So maybe that even gives you a ton of freedom because if product is a black box anyway, now you can experiment with AI without anyone in the C level even recognizing it. Maybe that's even a good thing.
Yeah, good challenge. Um, Super. Well, look, uh, let's wrap up there. Stephanie, thank you so much for your time. We've covered a huge amount of ground here, everything from what it's like to be a senior product leader, how you manage those relationships, to really tactical stuff about sort of what the latest kind of wave of AI means for individuals and teams. Um, I've put a few links in the chat if people want to follow you on Substack or connect with you on LinkedIn. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll find those in the show notes. Um, but thank you very much, Stephanie. It was great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Ed, and thanks for everyone for joining so late. I really appreciate your time and listening to us here.
Super. All right. Thanks very much, everyone. Hope to see you soon. Bye.
Ciao.